The night air was thick with the scent of gasoline and rain, the streets damp and glistening under flickering streetlights. The city was alive with distant voices, honking cars, and the rhythmic hum of engines. Yet to Jack, the world had gone completely silent. His paws pounded against the wet pavement, splashing through shallow puddles as he ran. His heart thundered in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had never been this scared before. Then the sound that would haunt him forever. A deafening screech, a sickening thud, the noise of impact. Jack skidded to a stop, his nails scraping against the asphalt as his head snapped toward the street. The sight before him made his stomach lurch. Sam's small, frail body had been thrown into the air like a rag doll, spinning lifelessly before crashing onto the pavement. The force of the impact sent a chilling crack echoing through the empty road. Blood. So much blood. Jack's vision blurred as he rushed forward. No, 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 no. His instincts screamed at him to do something. Anything. Sam lay still, his once bright eyes open, staring at the void. His little chest rose and fell in the shallowest of breaths, barely clinging to life. Blood seeped from his head dark and thick, painting the ground in tragedy. Jack whined, frantically licking his friend's face, nudging his cold, broken body with his snout. Wake up, please wake up. His actions begged. But there was no response. Sam's soft body, once filled with warmth and mischief, was now still, too still. Jack let out a desperate, broken howl, but the city didn't care. Cars continued to pass, swerving around the scene as if it were nothing. Pedestrians glanced, hesitated, then hurried along, unwilling to get involved. To them, Sam was just another stray animal on the street. To Jack, Sam was his whole world. The rain fell harder, soaking into Sam's fur, mixing with the blood, washing away the warmth that once existed between them. Jack laid down beside him, his head resting against Sam's tiny frame. He didn't care about the cold, he didn't care about the rain, he didn't care about anything. All that mattered was gone. Jack didn't know how long he stayed there. Hours passed. The night grew darker. The rain never stopped. Sam's body, once warm, was now cold beneath him. Jack shivered, not from the weather, but from something deeper. He had never felt so alone. The city around him moved on without a second thought. Jack lifted his head, ears flicking at the sound of laughter from a nearby alley. Humans, warm, dry, safe, oblivious. They didn't see him. They never did. Jack turned his gaze back to Sam, his heart sinking. Do I leave you here? The thought made his stomach twist. How could he? Jack gently pressed his nose against Sam's still face. There was no warmth left to feel. Something inside him broke. He closed his eyes, letting the rain wash over him. Maybe if he laid there long enough, he could fade away too. At some point, his body betrayed him. Hunger forced him to move. His stomach cramped, the emptiness inside clawing at him like a beast demanding survival. Jack forced himself onto shaky paws. His body ached, stiff from laying in the cold too long. His muscles screamed in protest. One last look at Sam. Then he turned away. Every step was heavier than the last. Jack wandered aimlessly through the alleys, his head low, his tail dragging behind him. His world felt emptier than ever. The city continued its relentless routine, indifferent to his pain. Lights flickered in windows, warm glows illuminating silhouettes of humans eating, laughing, living. The contrast was suffocating. Jack moved through the streets like a ghost. Then, the scent hit him. Food. His ears perked. His instincts, dulled by grief, screamed at him to follow. His nose led him to an overflowing garbage bin behind a restaurant. The smell of rotting meat made his stomach churn, but desperation overpowered disgust. Jack plunged his snout into the trash, searching. There, a half-eaten piece of meat. He swallowed it down in seconds, barely chewing. It tasted like nothing. The pain didn't fade. The emptiness didn't shrink. The world still felt cold, cruel, and unbearable. Jack curled up in a dark corner, his stomach slightly fuller, but his soul still starving. Sam was gone, and Jack didn't know how to exist without him. The night deepened. Jack drifted between wakefulness and exhaustion, shivering against the cold pavement. Then, a sound. Not the usual city noise. Something soft. His ears twitched. He opened his tired eyes, his vision blurry. A figure. A woman. She was kneeling a few feet away, an umbrella shielding her from the rain. In her hand, food. Jack's body tensed. No one had ever stopped for him before. She extended the food toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you hungry?" Jack didn't move. He didn't trust humans. She didn't get closer, just waited. Jack stared at her, studied her. Her eyes held something different. Not pity, not fear. Something else. For the first time since Sam died, Jack felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. Jack remained still, his drenched fur clinging to his frail frame as he watched the woman before him. She crouched a few feet away, her umbrella shielding her from the relentless rain. The scent of food was thick in the air, fresh, warm, unlike the rotting scraps he had scavenged earlier. But Jack didn't move. He had learned long ago that kindness from humans often came with a price. The woman didn't force him. She simply waited, her hands steady, her eyes filled with something Jack couldn't quite understand. Not pity, not fear. Something gentler. Jack knew humans. They were the ones who tossed him aside when he was no longer wanted. They were the ones who kicked at him when he got too close to their food. They were the ones who never looked twice when he and Sam sat huddled together in the freezing cold, starving, trembling, desperate for warmth. Jack had learned not to expect kindness. And yet, the woman didn't move away. She didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't wave her hands to scare him off. Instead, she lowered the food onto the pavement, placing it within reach before slowly retracting her hand. "I won't hurt you," she murmured. Jack's ears flicked at the sound of her voice. It was soft, gentle, not like the others. Still, he hesitated. The smell of food was overwhelming, his stomach aching in protest, but his instincts told him to be careful. Seconds passed, then minutes. The woman didn't leave. And hunger always won in the end. Jack took a cautious step forward, his paws pressing into the wet pavement. His body was stiff from exhaustion, from grief, from the weight of everything he had lost. But he forced himself closer. The woman remained perfectly still, watching him with quiet patience. Jack's nose twitched as he sniffed the food. It was real. And it was his. With one last glance at the woman, he snatched the meal and leaped back, retreating a few feet away. She didn't react, didn't try to take it back, didn't move to touch him. Jack devoured the food in seconds, his body shaking as the warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time in days, he felt something other than pain. Jack licked the remnants of food from his lips, his gaze drifting back to the woman. She was still watching him, but there was no expectation in her eyes. She wasn't waiting for him to come closer. She wasn't waiting for him to trust her. She was just there. Jack didn't understand it. No one had ever treated him like that before. She reached into the bag beside her, pulling out a small blanket. Carefully, she laid it down on the driest spot of pavement she could find, then stood. "If you want to stay here," she said softly, "it's okay." Jack's ears twitched. The woman took a step back, then another. She wasn't trying to take him home. She wasn't trying to force him to be hers. She was just offering something. Something Jack had never been given before. A choice. The woman left. Jack watched as she disappeared down the street, her umbrella bobbing with every step. For a long time, he stayed frozen, his body tense, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. No one else came. The city remained as indifferent as always. Jack turned his gaze toward the small blanket she had left behind. It wasn't much, but it was dry. And Jack was so tired. Cautiously, he stepped onto it, his paws pressing into the soft fabric. His body sagged, exhaustion finally catching up to him. For the first time since Sam had died, he closed his eyes and let himself rest. Not fully, not completely. But it was something, and for now, that was enough. Jack awoke to the soft golden light of dawn. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories came flooding back. The accident, the blood, the pain. Sam. Jack lifted his head, his heart sinking. Sam was still gone. Nothing had changed. The city still moved around him, uncaring, unbothered. But then Jack noticed something. The woman, she was back. She stood a few feet away, a steaming cup in her hand, her gaze gentle as she watched him stir. Jack's ears flicked. She came back? Why? He had never met a human who returned. Not for him. Not for someone like him. Jack stared at her, waiting for an answer. She didn't speak right away. She simply knelt down and set another small meal in front of him. And then, just like before, she backed away. Jack's heart pounded. What was she doing? Why was she still here? Why wasn't she like the others? Jack took a step forward, sniffing the food. It smelled good. It smelled safe. Jack looked up at her again, his amber eyes locking onto hers. She didn't move, didn't push, didn't demand anything from him. Jack didn't trust her. Not yet. But something deep inside him whispered, maybe she's different. The morning sun painted the city in soft gold, but for Jack, the world was still gray. He remained on the blanket, his body curled into itself, his breathing slow and steady. He was awake, but his eyes stayed half closed, watching the woman, Emily, from a distance. She was still there. She had come back. Jack didn't know why, and that made him uneasy. Humans never stayed. They never cared, and yet she had returned. Not with a leash, not with a cage, not with expectations. Just food, a warm drink for herself, and quiet patience. Jack didn't move. He waited, searching for a trick, for a trap, for a reason not to trust her. But Emily simply sat down a few feet away, sipping from her cup as if she wasn't in any rush. The city moved around them, cars honking, people talking, life continuing as usual. But in that small pocket of space, it was just them. And Jack didn't know what to do with that. The smell of food drifted toward him again. It wasn't much, just another small piece of meat and bread, but it smelled fresh. Jack's stomach twisted. He wasn't stupid. He knew how this worked. Humans gave food when they wanted something, a dog's loyalty, their obedience, their trust. And Jack wasn't willing to give any of those. Not after everything. Not after Sam. But his hunger was unbearable. His body ached from exhaustion, his ribs pressed against his skin, his legs trembled from weakness. And food was food. So like before, Jack crawled forward, snatched the meal, and retreated back to his spot. Emily didn't react. She simply took another sip of her coffee, gazing at him with something Jack couldn't place. Not pity. Not amusement. Just understanding. Jack ate quickly, his ears twitching as he waited for her to try something. A leash, a collar, a demand. But none came. Only silence. Only patience. Only her quiet presence, lingering without force. Jack didn't trust it. Didn't trust her. But he didn't run either. And that was something. Minutes passed. Emily finished her coffee, crumpled the cup in her hands, and finally stood. Jack tensed. Here it comes. The part where she reaches for him, tries to take him, tries to claim him, but she didn't. She simply picked up her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and looked down at him with a small, quiet smile. I'll be back, she murmured. Then she walked away. Jack's ears flicked forward, his head tilting slightly as he watched her disappear into the crowd. She left, just like that? No tricks, no games, no force. Jack didn't know how to process it. For so long, every human interaction had come with a price, one he wasn't willing to pay. But Emily, she had left him a choice. Stay or go, eat or ignore, trust or don't. And Jack didn't know why that unsettled him more than anything else. The next day, she came back, and the next, and the next. Always the same. She would sit, she would leave food, she would watch him from a distance, her expression calm and patient. And Jack didn't know what to make of it. Each morning he expected her to stop coming, to grow bored, to give up. But she didn't, and little by little, Jack's hesitation began to crack. He didn't move closer, didn't let her touch him, didn't fully trust her, but he waited for her, and that scared him more than anything. One morning, after nearly a week of the same routine, Emily arrived with something new, a bowl. It wasn't much, just a simple metal dish filled with clean water. Jack's eyes flicked toward it, then back at her. Another test, another trap. But the water smelled fresh, real. Jack was thirsty. He hesitated for what felt like forever before slowly inching toward the bowl. His nose touched the rim. He sniffed, then finally he drank, and Emily smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not a smirk, just a gentle, understanding smile. Like she had been waiting, like she had been hoping, like she was proud of him. Jack didn't understand it, didn't understand her, but he didn't back away. And when he finished drinking, he stayed close, still out of reach, still watching, still wary, but closer than before. That night, as Jack curled up in his alley, he felt something unfamiliar inside him. Not fear, not pain, not even hunger. Something else, something quieter, something like hope. And that terrified him, because hope meant wanting. And Jack had learned a long time ago that wanting led to pain. So he curled tighter, burying his nose into his fur, trying to push the feeling away, trying to convince himself that he didn't care, that he wasn't waiting for her tomorrow, that he didn't want her to come back. But deep down, he knew the truth, and that truth scared him more than anything else. The morning came, but Jack didn't move. He was awake, his ears twitching at every passing sound, his nose picking up the scent of rain lingering in the air, but he didn't move. Not yet. Because Emily would come. And for the first time, Jack was waiting for her. Not just for food, not just for water, but for her. The realization unsettled him, but he didn't push it away. Not this time. Like clockwork, Emily arrived. She didn't speak. She didn't try to touch him. She simply sat in her usual spot, placed down food and water, and waited. Jack lifted his head, staring at her through narrowed eyes, scanning her for any sign of deception. But there was none. There never was. So slowly, cautiously, he crawled forward, his body low to the ground as he approached the meal. He ate. She watched. And this time, Jack didn't retreat as quickly. He stayed closer. Still out of reach, but closer. And Emily noticed. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but she didn't make a move toward him. She simply sat there, giving him space, letting him take the lead. Jack didn't understand her. Didn't understand why she kept coming back. Didn't understand why she didn't demand anything from him. But for some reason, he no longer felt the overwhelming urge to run. And that terrified him more than anything. A week passed, then another. Every day was the same. Emily came. Emily sat. Emily waited. And Jack, hesitant, wary Jack, began to let his walls slip. He no longer waited for her to leave before drinking the water. He no longer crawled forward. He walked. He no longer bolted away the second he finished eating. He lingered, watched her, listened. And Emily, she was always talking, not to him necessarily, just in general. About the weather. About the city. About a book she was reading or a song stuck in her head. It was nonsense, meaningless human chatter. But for some reason, Jack found himself listening anyway. And one day, when Emily reached out, her fingers barely brushing against his fur, he didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He didn't run. He just stayed. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. Then, as slowly as possible, she ran her fingers gently across his head. And Jack let her. It happened gradually. The next day, he let her touch him again. The day after that, he took a step closer. And then, one afternoon, Emily did something unexpected. She stood. Jack tensed, ears flattening, but she simply dusted off her jeans and looked down at him with a gentle smile. "Come on," she said softly, nodding toward the street. "Let's walk." Jack's heart pounded. He hadn't walked beside a human since Sam. Since the last time he had trusted someone. His paws shifted against the pavement. He didn't know what to do. Emily didn't force him, didn't pull out a leash, didn't demand his obedience. She just waited, gave him a choice. And Jack hesitated for what felt like an eternity. But then, as if his paws had made the decision for him, he took a step forward, then another, and Emily's smile grew. They walked in silence, side by side, no leash, no force, just together. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel completely alone. As the days passed, Jack became more comfortable walking with Emily. He still didn't fully trust her, but he liked her. And that was terrifying, because liking someone meant losing something when they left, and humans always left. But Emily, she hadn't left. Not yet. So when she finally pulled out the collar, Jack froze. His breath hitched, his muscles tensed, his tail dropped low. Emily saw his reaction immediately. "It's okay," she murmured, kneeling to his level. "You don't have to, but I'd like to take you somewhere safe, somewhere warm." Jack's heart thundered in his chest. A home. Shelter. He knew what she meant. She wanted to take him in, but the last time he had belonged to someone, he had lost everything. Jack took a slow step back, his eyes locked onto the collar as if it were a trap. Emily sighed, her expression soft. "I won't make you," she promised. And for the first time in his life, a human meant it. She set the collar down on the pavement. Then she stood, gave him a final quiet look and whispered, "You decide." Then she walked away, leaving the choice in his paws. Jack stayed frozen, his breath shallow, his legs trembling. He stared at the collar, then at Emily's retreating form. His mind was screaming at him to run, to disappear into the alleyways, to never trust a human again. But his heart whispered something else. "She came back for you. She never forced you. She gave you a choice." Jack's paws twitched, and before he could talk himself out of it, before he could let fear win, he picked up the collar in his teeth, and he ran after her. Jack's heart pounded as he ran after Emily, the collar clutched tightly in his teeth. What am I doing? He didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't let her walk away. Not after everything. Not after she had given him something no one else ever had. A choice. Emily heard the soft patter of paws behind her and turned. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw Jack standing there, ears pinned back, his tail low, but in his mouth, the collar. Jack stared at her, unsure, afraid, but willing. Emily's eyes softened. Slowly she crouched down, extending a hand. "You're sure?" she whispered. Jack didn't move for a moment. Then, with hesitant steps, he closed the distance. And he let her fasten the collar around his neck. Jack expected fear, expected the familiar weight of ownership, the suffocating feeling of being trapped. But when Emily stepped back, smiling, her voice was still the same, gentle, warm, free. "Come on, Jack," she said softly. "Let's go home." Home. Jack wasn't sure what that word meant anymore, but as he walked beside her, leash-free, without pressure or force, he realized maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe home was a feeling. And maybe, just maybe, Emily was becoming his. Emily's home wasn't grand. It wasn't a mansion or some fancy estate, but it was warm. It was quiet. And most importantly, it smelled like her. Jack hesitated in the doorway. It had been years since he had stepped inside a house. Would the walls close in on him? Would the door slam shut, trapping him like before? Emily didn't force him. She just waited. And slowly, Jack stepped inside. The scent of fresh laundry and something sweet lingered in the air. There was a couch, a small table, and a few scattered books. Nothing about it felt like a cage. It felt safe. Emily guided him toward a soft dog bed in the corner, but Jack hesitated. Instead, he curled up near the door, where he could still see the way out. Emily sighed but didn't push. "Okay," she murmured. "Take your time." And Jack did. The first night was the hardest. Jack didn't sleep. Not really. Every creak of the house made his ears twitch. Every gust of wind against the windows made his muscles tense. At some point, he heard Emily get up, padding softly toward the kitchen. He watched her through half-lidded eyes as she poured a glass of water. Then she turned, saw him awake, and instead of speaking, instead of forcing comfort, she simply sat on the floor near him. Not too close, not too far, just there. And for the first time since Sam, Jack felt something settle in his chest. Not grief, not pain, just peace. Days turned into weeks. Jack learned Emily's patterns. He learned that she sang badly when she cooked, that she muttered to herself when she read, that she always gave him the option to walk beside her without a leash. She never made him feel owned, never made him feel trapped. She just let him be. And slowly, Jack started choosing her. He started sleeping closer. Started sitting beside her instead of by the door. Started trusting. And one night, after weeks of patience, of quiet, of simply existing together, Jack crawled onto the couch beside her. Emily froze, her book halfway open. Her eyes shimmered. And then, so softly Jack barely heard it, she whispered, "Good boy." Jack's heart clenched. Not in pain, not in grief, but in something he hadn't felt in so long. Warmth, love, belonging, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe it. Jack never forgot Sam. Not the way his fur smelled after the rain. Not the way his laughter used to echo in empty alleyways. Not the way he would whisper, "We'll always stick together, buddy." Jack never forgot. But he learned to carry the memory differently. He learned that loving Emily didn't erase the past, that moving forward didn't mean leaving Sam behind, because Sam would always be with him. In the way he curled up beside Emily, just like he used to with Sam. In the way he protected her, just like he protected Sam. In the way he loved, fully, fiercely, without hesitation. Because that's what Sam would have wanted, for Jack to find happiness again. And now, finally, he had. Years passed. Jack was no longer a stray, no longer a ghost wandering the streets. He had a home, a family, and more importantly, he had peace. One day, as he lay in the sun-drenched backyard, Emily sat beside him, scratching gently behind his ears. "Do you know how much I love you?" she murmured. Jack sighed, pressing his head into her lap. He knew. He had always known. Because love wasn't just about words, it was about patience, kindness, showing up, again and again. And Emily had never stopped showing up. Jack had lost so much, but in the end, he had gained even more. Jack's story was one of loss, yes, but more than that, it was a story of love, of healing, of choosing to trust again even when it felt impossible. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought with teeth and claws. Sometimes they're fought with the courage to love again. And Jack had won. He had finally come home. Thanks for listening. I hope you felt every emotion in Jack's journey. This was more than just a story. It was a reminder that healing takes time, but love always finds a way. Let me know your thoughts. Did Jack's story touch your heart? Would you want to read more stories like this? And most importantly, if you've ever felt lost, just remember, home is out there, love is waiting, and you are never truly alone.